From the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., this is Update One, the club's official podcast. It features newsworthy stories originating from the NPC facilities, as well as broader topics related to journalism, communications, press freedom, and transparency.
On March 10th, the National Press Club announced that Executive Director Bill McCarren would be stepping down after more than 15 years of distinguished service. I'm Adam Cano, co-chair of the club's Broadcast Podcast Committee, and I'm joined by Bill to discuss this news and to look back on a remarkable tenure of leadership. Bill, welcome to Update One.
Thank you, Adam. Good to be here.
Before we talk about you and your news, can you remind our listeners about the role of Executive Director here at the National Press Club?
Sure. The executive director is the sort of top staff position. As executive director, I report to the president and by extension, the board. And the role is really hire, fire, recruit, retain, motivate the staff, assistance in strategic direction, budget, which is an important part of it. And then I have 7 or 8 direct reports that I'm responsible for.
You were first a regular member of the club starting in 1986. So what attracted you to the MPC and what was the atmosphere like back then?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was a different time then. It was pretty wide open and fun. Not the club isn't fun now, but the bar was pretty busy place. And there were, you just walk right in. There were no gates or security or those kind of concerns. And what attracted me was I was coming to Washington to start a business and wanted to be in the National Press building. And of course, if you're in the building, part of the reason to be in the building was to be close to the club and be able to use it when you needed it. And, it was a great place and still is a great place to meet reporters and sources. And that was important to me in my work. So, I was on the 12th floor of the building, so one floor up to the club, meet people, to the bar, and that sort of thing. So it was very convenient, very fun, and robust programming, and it was just a great experience.
The club's board of governors hired you as general manager in 2007 and then appointed you executive director in 2010, the first person to hold that executive director title in the organization's 116-year history. So tell me about each of those roles as you assumed them. What was going on at that time?
Yes. So general manager is really like a sort of a COO kind of job. And what that means is really just responsible primarily for the business. And my predecessor, a guy named John Bloom, was from the hotel industry. And so I was filling that role and those shoes. And because I was involved in the club and programs and mission as a member, I was either called upon or was involved more in those kinds of issues working with members. And so a few years in, they decided to change the title to executive director to sort of reflect what I was doing that was kind of different. And maybe it was easier for me to do that sort of stuff because I'd been a member and because of the skill set and interest, I'd say.
For decades, the club was driven by print journalism, but it was during your tenure that a broadcast task force was first created, followed by the team or committee that we now have today. Can you tell us a little more about the genesis there?
Sure. Well, it's pretty obvious that that broadcast was an important part. I mean, when the club started in 1908, it wasn't an important part, right? And so there was an evolution, and I think having a broadcast team gave some of our broadcast members, an on-ramp to the club in a way that was welcoming and helpful. And I think that was important just for socialization. There, I don't think it's so much anymore, but at points there has been a gulf between print and broadcast. And print people, I would say in general, were not always as accepting of broadcast when it was new. And I think some of that has worn away, but there still are sort of those issues. And, broadcast people like to be with each other. And I think that's fine. And so the committee gave a way for that. And I'll just harken back to a couple of people like Ralph Malvick, I remember, and Sam Holt, and even Ron Nesson. And these were, kind of in their own way, giants in the broadcast business and members of the club. And it was good for them to have a place to go and be with each other, just socially, right?
Absolutely. No. And I remember all of them, and they are absolute lions of the industry. And that increased focus on broadcasting is also evident in the purchase of what is now the Broadcast Operations Center on the fourth floor of the National Press Building, followed by its recapitalization for high definition TV. Those must not have been easy calls to make, right?
Yeah, well, the broadcast center purchase happened just before my time here. I think that was completed in 2006. And there were a group of members that were, very involved in wanting to take the club that direction. Our friend, Mark Hamrick, Jonathan Salant was involved in that. Jerry Zaremski, who was the president when I came in. And there were others. And I think in part it was a business decision. There's a unique space on 4 that can host a good size studio. And there are not other spaces in the building that have those same kind of requirements. And so if the club didn't step in, someone else would have purchased the facility and made a business of that. So it made sense for the club to move. We didn't really have the money for it, but we had credit. So we borrowed a lot of money and made the purchase and retrofitted the place to a modern standard then. And I took over in 2007. So it was more or less, okay, now we've got it. We've built it. How do we make it, work financially and for the members also?
Arguably, the rise of digital media was an even more disruptive force for the club. What has that meant for us, and how has the organization evolved to account for an increasingly digital-first communications world?
Oh, that's a good question. So in the beginning with the Broadcast Center, for example, probably, close to 100% of what we were doing, maybe 90%, was going on television. It was being made for the spec of television. And now I'd say maybe 50% or less is being made for television. It's purpose built for, going onto a digital platform, and all of it is going on a digital platform. But I mean, some of this is exclusively for digital. So that changes, some things about how you have to operate and the kinds of projects you're involved in. I'd say expands them. So then the club, the team on the staff itself has had to change, where if you go back to the, before we built a broadcast center, you have a relatively small percentage of staff being, tech background, tech workers. And now it's a much larger percentage of the staff and maybe more going forward. So, having digital, natives in all positions is important to the club. And certainly there's more a digital team on the staff at the club than pre the 2006 purchase of the Broadcast Center.
Sadly, one thing that has not changed over the decades is the need for strong advocacy on the topic of press freedom. In fact, it's arguably under more strain here and around the world than ever. You've made that a hallmark of your tenure leading the club. Where does that drive come from?
Yeah, well, I've been interested in this issue for a long time. I guess where it comes from. My wife was a broadcast journalist. In 2005, she had an incident with the Prince George's County Police while reporting, where she was pulled over. There were 7 police cars. She was being held at gunpoint. She was ultimately injured in this process. And, we brought suit against against the police department. And, in that I learned that, you can take a journalist off the street, injure them, stop their reporting. And there's not a lot that journalism can do about that. And, the journalists need to band together when they're in trouble. And when we went to court, there were a small number of journalists that were in the courtroom. You're kind of on your own in these cases. And I understand why journalists don't want to make themselves the story. And I get that. But in issues of press freedom, the journalist is the story and needs support. And so maybe that's the genesis of it. But I would say for me, and I don't know why, to be honest, Adam, but I really engaged with the Jason Rezaian story, Jason of the Washington Post. That was in 2015. He was taken in 2014. I got to know his brother and his family well, and they did a very good job of helping me understand just what he was going through and they were going through. And, my sense was if this can be done to the Washington Post, it can be done to almost anyone. And it just struck me as how egregious a violation of rights this was, and the suffering that he was enduring. So I think it's sort of those two things were really formative, for me. And then as you say, it's growing, and so I see it more and more around the world and in this country as well.
Yeah, I distinctly remember for the Jason Rezaian campaign, you organizing a live reading, I guess it was a live stream on YouTube of his work for, I think it was 24 hours. And each of us had the opportunity to read some of his pieces over the air and in between talk about the importance of him being released. And that really was remarkable to be part of. And I actually happened to end up with the time slot right before his boss at the Post, who was said some very kind words. And I just sort of couldn't believe that, he was thanking me when what we were all trying to do was so much bigger.
Yeah, well, thank you for participating in that. And that's a key, having wide participation on that. Obviously, you're remembering it from years ago, but it had an effect. I mean, people who participated still remember doing that. And I think for journalists, it's very hard to figure out. They have the passion, but what can they do that's, within their sort of ethical framework, but that also makes a difference. And this felt for people like a way to really make a difference. And I was really pleased with how many people, yourself and others, that came out to do that, including a lot of people at all hours of the night. It was an interesting technique.
It was. And all those efforts would be for naught if the club didn't continue to exist. And so one of the things that I think people will certainly remember fondly about your term here was the business acumen that you brought to the club. And I'm just curious as to your thoughts about, what you saw when you came in and looked at this, purely from a business perspective.
Yeah, I saw it as a turnaround opportunity. I mean, the club has this wonderful, iconic brand. But at the time it was in a high debt, no reserves, a business model that was not profitable. And I just thought that, we would attack on those areas and try to figure out how to shore up, how we did our business so that we were making margin and pay off the debt and start to build reserves from the profits. And that was not, people got it. I would say in the beginning, I probably had about a quarter of the staff, with me. And over time, they got it more and more. And it involved a change in how we worked. And the leadership of the membership was really great about partnering on this, because just long term, they could see, you just have to do this. Mm-hmm. And the club rightly committed a lot of resources to the broadcast center, but there was going to be a while before we saw that as a full payback. So I don't think we had a choice. And I had not done a kind of a turnaround environment. I'd been in a startup environment. I've been in a high growth environment. I've been in a public company environment, but I hadn't done a turnaround. And so it was a business challenge that, that I appreciated, but also one that needed doing. I mean, that sounds maybe too grandiose, but I think the world needs the press club, and I think the United States and our democracy need the press club, and journalism needs it. And so it was a business that needed to be worked on, but it was a concept that needed to be supported and sustained. And so that was what was in my head then.
The importance of those decisions you took were tested like no one expected in 2020 when the pandemic came, and the club was, of course, not immune to the impact of months-long closures and false starts and abandoned reopenings and all the rest of it. Take us back to those dark and uncertain days, and what moments stand out for you?
Yeah, well, I think it's quite literally the case that the press club of 2007, when I came in, would not have been able to survive the pandemic financially. And I mean, even with good reserves, it was a challenge. So I am glad that we took those business decisions and I'm glad of the great, support from the presidents, I have been able to work with over the years, Donna Lyon Leger and Mark Hamrick and Jerry Zarinsky and many others in the early days who really, stood in and supported the changes, because you can't do that in 1 year. We had to have a sustained effort over a decade. We didn't know what was coming, to prepare ourselves. There were times after 9/11 where we would say that we're preparing ourselves for the next, big terrorist attack and the impact it might have financially. Well, this was way beyond, what might happen. And so, we needed every bit of what we had and a lot of the teamwork that was necessary and all that. What I remember being with Mike Friedman, who did an awesome job on this, member of your broadcast team and friend of both of ours. And Mike and I were in his office and we were watching, had the TV on and talking through what we needed to do and when. And it was just at that time that we saw that the NBA was shutting down. For some reason, this became super real for us in a hurry that way. We're both sports fans, but, for some reason, when we heard that was happening, we knew life as we know it is rapidly changing and that we needed to really accelerate our discussions about what we had to do at the club to keep members safe. Since it's a podcast, I'm just going to give you one quick thing. Jason Rezaian was doing a podcast on Spotify about his experiences, and I was asked to be a participant in that. This is during the pandemic, and so what happened was the producer who was in Washington called and said, we need to drop off some equipment with you. And this was not a time that we were seeing each other face to face. And it was before vaccines and all that. And so I heard my doorbell ring and I went to the door, and then in the middle of my sidewalk was a box. And then maybe 15 feet back from that was the producer, outside, but wearing a mask. And she waved and I waved and she left, and I went out and got the box and brought it in and assembled the equipment to make the to help make the podcast. And, it's just, we did that kind of stuff, I think, in some version or another, kind of every day. But now it seems so surreal, that we were a danger to each other and had to go to lengths to think about how to do things safely. And of course, in a social environment like the club, all the more so.
Yeah. Ironically, the club had its most profitable year in 2022, and yet Washington is a changed place after the pandemic. Arguably, there's less foot traffic, at least around the part of the city that the National Press Building is in. What does a changed downtown core, at least for the foreseeable future, mean for the club today and perhaps going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are a lot of little lunch only spots right around where our office is and where the press club is. And there, many of them are not open because as you say, the foot traffic is not there. The people are not working in office. And some of that's changing. There's a little more of that occurring, but it's always 2 or 3 days a week kind of thing. And you can notice it. I mean, the traffic is less. The traffic on the street is less. Washington is one of the worst cities, I guess I would say, in this. I mean, I think it's 40% return to work for downtown. And because so many of the jobs are doable, remote, and the club isn't, I mean, we really have to, it's a facility. We've got to be there and you need the customers to be there. And as you say, we're doing fine on events right now. People are wanting to come back and be in person on events. We have fewer of the members who are working downtown, I would say. And so it becomes a different kind of decision. Instead of let's go over to the club or let's drop into the club. It's more like you really have to plan to go to the club. And, that's something we have to overcome. I think members have to be patient with that. We are adding back in the services, and yet we don't want to add back in the services with, if they're not, if there's not the traffic, to make use of them. So it's a rolling process, and we appreciate, the members working to help make this happen. I think the teams are awfully important as far as members return to office. So we're doing a lot of hybrid, where about half the team might be in person and half the team is remote. And honestly, I think it's going to take a year or two until we really see something that more resembles the club we're used to.
A couple questions looking forward. You intend to stay in your role until your successor is in place. It's been announced that person is Didier Soji, the general manager of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Hong Kong. Tell us a bit about him.
Oh, he's a bright, engaged, thoughtful person. He's a Swiss national with also Australian and New Zealand passports. He's worked classically trained in culinary arts and hospitality in Switzerland, which is a very high standard, and he's French speaker, but English speaker also, but French is his original language. And he's led resorts in interesting places like New Zealand and Australia. And he's, for the last several years, he's been the GM at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Hong Kong, as you mentioned, which is has its own kind of press freedom challenges, where the government provides the building that they use. It's a beautiful building. I haven't seen it in person, but I've seen the photos. And so Didier has had the experience of being in a country that is, not welcoming to free press in the way Hong Kong, itself once was. And so he's learned a lot, and I think those are lessons that can be, well applied in his new role. He's He's married. He has a 8-year-old son, and they will all be coming to the States. He has not worked in the States or lived here. He's visited here, so I think it's a big opportunity for him. But I think we found through our search, and the members did a great job on this. Shout outs to Jen Judson in particular, who was involved in it. But we found a great person who has a skill set that fits, and I think he'll thrive here. And just a nice guy. I mean, I think members will really appreciate him.
No, we look forward to welcoming him. 2 quick last questions. First, what's next for you?
Oh, I've been telling people I'm planning to be 67 full time, but I'm going to remain involved in press freedom in some way, and I'm going to do some consulting, and that sort of thing. Initially, I'll do some with the club. They've asked me to be available to Didier for 3 months when he comes on. I don't think I'll be in the office for that. I'm probably going to be, remote, and may come in from time to time when he wants to see me. But no great plans. I guess I would say not interested really at this point in being involved in leading an organization that's 100 people the way the press club was. I've been meeting payroll on some level or another since 1986. So there's a lot of responsibility in that, and a lot of, pressure in that. And it's wonderful stuff, but I think it's time for me to at least take a break, do a little travel, take on projects, but not in as sustained a way as I have been.
Your tenure is especially noteworthy, not just for its duration, but for what you've accomplished. Last question. What will you miss most?
Oh, gosh. That's a good one. So, I'm going to say I will miss the members and the staff. I do hope to, see the members and staff on a kind of an ongoing basis, but there's a real sense in these kind of jobs where you do have to step away and not be as present to make space for the new team and the new guy. So I'm mindful of that, and but I'll find my ways. And it's a long time, 15 years working, but also 20 years before that. So a lot of friendships made, and I like to say to people that there aren't that many places in the world where you can join and make friends. And it becomes harder and harder as life goes on. So Press Club is that. And it was that for me, whether I was working or participating as a member. So I'll miss that, and I'll miss the place in a way. It's just a active, fun, vibrant kind of environment. And, news there is all around you and all that. Yeah, I'll miss that, but I also think it's time to, start focusing on some other things, that are not necessarily happening in the 44,000 square feet that I was given some responsibility for.
Well, Bill, I appreciate your time today, but more importantly, thank you sincerely on behalf of thousands of NPC members and journalists everywhere and communicators for your selfless service to the club, as well as its mission here in Washington, D.C. and around the world. I'm Adam Cano. Thanks again for listening.
You have been listening to Update One, the official podcast of the National Press Club, the world's leading professional organization for journalists and a vigorous advocate of press freedom worldwide. If you have any questions or comments about Update One, send an email to updateonepodcast@gmail.com.